This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Today, we're going to talk about the concept of rest. So I want to start by asking you the question, what is your current relationship with rest? Now, when I say rest, I don't only mean sleep, although certainly sleep is a type of rest. It's when our body literally rests, repairs, all the things. But I mean the concept of rest during your waking hours. Because what we typically experience is constant rush, do. And then the other thing that I've noticed, and I noticed this not only in my own life, but I noticed this consistently in clients and in friends and in people that I talk to in general in our society who have this very interesting relationship with rest, whereby there is significant guilt and shame if we're not productive all the motherfucking time. Like literally if we're not productive all the time. And we'll use sometimes self-deprecating humor, or we'll say, oh, I was a total shitbag today, or whatever. And I would like to invite all of us to stop doing that. There's nothing, you do you. But here's what it's doing. It's that it's reinforcing this idea that it's not equally productive to actually take rest for yourself. Because our human bodies in particular, but also your spirit, your psyche, your emotions, you need time to rest. And this is not the topic of this podcast, but one of the big things that happens when our bodies are constantly living in it's fight or flight mode. You've heard me talk before about how most of us have been unconsciously living in survival, where our brain waves are pegged at a very high wave frequency, and our bodies are responding as though they're constantly under threat. And this is why you see in our society, most people I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm burnt out. And somehow we've normalized this is okay. Y'all, there's nothing quote unquote wrong with you, but this is not something that we want to normalize. These are not states of being that we want to normalize with acceptance and then even jokingly shame or judge ourselves for taking rest. Because in this episode, we're going to talk about the concept of rest. We're going to talk about the concept of the conditioning. If you're one of those people that feels like you can't take rest, or if you do, the guilt robs you of any enjoyment that you have from the rest. We're going to talk about a couple places where this comes from. It's not so much that it matters where it originates, because as I always say, the origin really matters less than what we're going to do about it or what we're going to do with it. But it's helpful sometimes to just illustrate these things to help to open up your mind and your consciousness to where this might be true in your life. And then we're going to talk about what our natural cycles are and how to start to put you in touch with that and give you a little more permission to connect with what it means for you to actually take real rest. Because the importance of taking rest, as I alluded to a little earlier when I was talking about survival and how our bodies get pegged in this place, when your body is constantly pegged in that survival mode, you're literally not in rest and repair. Your body has all of those stress hormones, the cortisol, the adrenaline rushing through you, and those were always ever meant to be for a short duration of time. But when that becomes the constant state of being, your body never gets to rest and repair. And inevitably there's going to be disease or breakdown that happens from that. That's not to scare you. That's just the reality that this is important to examine and to understand how we create rest. And there's different types of rest, right? You can take a rest within your body and your nervous system. Starts with understanding that balance of being in survival mode versus being in that creation mode, right? That's one place internally within yourself whereby no matter what is going on in your external world, you don't need external conditions to align just perfectly so that you can quote unquote rest internally with your nervous system, right? That's not what I'm talking about. That is what the one type of rest that we always want to be continuing to condition within ourselves is balancing our nervous system, balancing our brain, balancing all these things out literally within ourselves and within our physiology. And then we have the external types of rest, which are literally like when you're not doing something that is for work or for, if I'm not working, I have to clean the house. If I'm not cleaning the house, I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. Now, it's not saying that there aren't things that need to be done in our daily lives. However, what I'm talking about is the energetic and the emotion that is underlying it, that somehow if we don't do all the things all the time, that we are lazy, that there's guilt, or that there's any other kind of negative shaming emotion at play. Because what happens is that when we do go to take rest, we either so for example, let's say that you take a Saturday and you decide, I'm going to sit on this couch and I'm going to binge watch my favorite show that I'm so into right now. And I'm just going to watch it all day. And that's what I'm going to do. And that you do that, but then there is this undercurrent within you somewhere that's like, but I didn't get anything done today. Oh my God, I'm such a shitbag. Oh, I should have done this. Oh my God. And like you notice that even if it's not a super loud voice, there's like this undercurrent that you shouldn't, and you know how I feel about shouldn't if you've followed me for a hot minute, that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And what that ends up doing is it ends up literally robbing you of whatever enjoyment, whatever peace, whatever rest, whatever disconnection that you would be getting from that experience. Now, I want to be clear that there's a big difference between when we are numbing ourselves, and binge watching can be a way that we numb ourselves. So can alcohol, so can, over shopping, overindulging, anything can be a way that we numb ourselves. That's not what I'm talking about here. That's a whole other conversation that I don't want to go into right now because it'll pull me off in a completely different direction for another podcast. But there's a difference between numbing ourselves and there's a difference between sitting down and saying, I am consciously, with my active choice, taking this Saturday and I'm going to sit on this couch in my most comfortable clothes with my most comfortable blanket with whatever snacks feel good for my body today. And I am going to enjoy this show. I'm turning off all my alerts. I'm not checking email. I'm not checking text. I'm not doing anything. I am immersing myself in this and I'm going to enjoy every freaking minute of it. Right? That's very different. If that's how you truly feel rested, right? Some people find rest in creative pursuits and their activities that's, if people are very artistic, if you get into a creative pursuit, you can find that because you're completely tuning out anything else that's going on around you. And if you get in that zone, that flow state, you may find a lot of genuine rest and replenishment in that. Only you will have the answer to how you rest best. And it's okay if you don't have that answer right now because I'm not sure that most people know how they rest best, but what this is an invitation for you to start to explore what rest looks like for you, and also what little whispering voices are coming up related to shame or guilt if you have a day where you're like, I am really not feeling it. I'm feeling extra tired. I'm feeling really unmotivated today. And a lot of times we'll be like, all right, I just got to push through. I got to push through. I got to push through. And again, there's a time and a place and there are circumstances where we are in a place where, yeah, sometimes we need to just power through and get it done. The problem is we apply that way too much, because then we go long past the point where we've actually achieved any kind of rest for ourselves. And I know you're going, well, Jen, what are the rules for what's what? Unfortunately, I cannot give that to you. That is something each of us have to understand and determine for ourselves. And this is all coming back to the core of absolutely everything I teach, which is your own relationship within yourself and your own relationship with how you operate within yourself and interacting with the world around you. And so you'll know, and we all know, because I listen, y'all, nobody is a bigger bullshit of themselves than I am. I can bullshit myself into anything, and I'm aware of it. So I know the safety switches to put in place to ask myself, to check myself, ma'am. I know that sounds convincing, but you and I both know you full of some bullshit right now, and it sounds like some very convincing bullshit. But it's an invitation for you to look at where are the unconscious places this is showing up, because this is the other thing. Part of my intention is to help you bring conscious awareness to these things, because then you can make a conscious choice about it, and you can choose not to continue to allow the guilt and shame to be present, or you can choose to take steps to begin to reduce it until it starts to go away completely, right? Because what's happening with this concept of not being able to rest or not being able to take rest without guilt is a form of conditioning. It's a form of societal conditioning. For most people, it is a form of religious conditioning. And because I live in the United States, I can only speak from the experience in the US. I know some of these things are universal, but they may manifest in different ways, different religions, different backgrounds, all the things. But I know that there are common threads about rest and ideas and conditioning around rest. So conditioning tells us, whether it's from society, whether it's from religion, that rest is unproductive. And you've heard the quote, I'm sure. And if you haven't, here's a new one. Idle hands are the devil's playthings. Now, this is attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and there are significant threads from religion, particularly Christianity, that are related to this concept. And what this turns into, what this morphs into to different degrees, is the consequences of being slothful or inactive. If you are not productive, then you are open to sin, and this is bad. Can we just not? Could we just not? That's all I have to say. Could we just not do that? Could we just not do that? Because while there may be I think everything ultimately there's positive that you can take from it, but so many things get twisted, they get taken out of context, and ultimately they get turned into a bat to beat ourselves up, to create more shame, more guilt, more fear, and also more judgment that gets projected externally and reflected back to ourselves. And all of those things I just listed, shame, guilt, and fear, are very heavy emotions, and they are very heavy energetics that will quite literally keep you in a place. That's a whole other podcast in and of itself. I say that all the time, I know, but it's as I talk, I wish y'all could see. Actually, I don't. It's a frightening, amazing, creative place, how my brain works, but I see all these threads as they interconnect. I digress. So shame, guilt, and fear are very heavy, and they will keep us locked in our lower centers. Literally, they will keep us locked in our lower energy centers in our body. And when that happens, we can't get into our hearts. It's much more difficult to get into our hearts. And it's even more difficult to connect to any kind of higher frequency of consciousness within ourselves. So put a pin in that. We'll come back to that at some point. But when there's this idea that has pervaded our culture, even if you were not brought up, again, I'm speaking only in the United States because that's my experience. Even if you weren't brought up in a strict religious or Christian household, this has pervaded our culture, and it's snuck into corporate America too, is that if you are not productive all the time, it's bad. You're bad, right? and be productive or bad things will happen. Be productive or the devil will get you. If you're not always doing something, then you're, in the South, they say you're sorry. You're sorry. Well, there's a big there's a big difference between being in a place where your lack of action or your lack of quite literally doing your job is creating negative consequences for those around you. However, this concept of idle hands has really gotten taken out of context, and people who inherently are just good, solid people, and this is usually the ones who are truly affected by these statements, are the ones that never in their life would they ever be quote unquote idle, right? And they're doers, they're good salt of the earth people, and they have developed an unhelpful relationship with rest because of how these things got internalized. And so this is really an invitation, as I said, for you to examine what is your relationship with rest? What is your relationship with this idea of productivity, that absolutely everything you do has to be productive according to this very narrow band of definition, right? Because we see this show up in corporate as well, right? And this is the idea of it's hyper growth. You have to always go, go, go. And especially if you're in any kind of sales, which, I mean, most companies, if you're not selling something, then why do you exist, right? It's just the nature of it. It's tied to the revenue line. It's like, oh, hyper growth every year, more, 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 more. And if you're not doing it and you're not doing it all the time and burning yourself out, then that somehow this is this big negative thing. This hustle culture. Oh my God, I'm so over this hustle culture. This like toxic bro. Sorry guys, but toxic bro hustle culture. Oh God, it's just gross. My whole body has like a negative reaction to it, because you can be very productive. You can be very successful. You can have all of those things, and you can still have balance in your life, and you can still rest. It's true. It's possible. But this is the idea that when we are constantly in this place where we genuinely don't feel like we can ever rest, or that anytime we rest, we have so much guilt that it robs us of any benefit, I want you to think about this. There is a time and a place to do all the things. But that time and a place is not every single minute of every single fucking day. It's not. There is a concept of cycles that in the Western world we have lost sight of. Not everybody, because you can't ever make, I don't believe you can ever make a sweeping statement that everybody has, but I can say that the majority of our culture has lost sight of cycles. And this is where you will find, if you look at indigenous cultures, this is literally woven into the fabric of who they are, right? And you will see, if you look out wherever you are in the world, you look out your window right now, whatever hemisphere you're in, depends on what season it's in. Here in the US, it's winter. It is so very much winter. And everything has cycles. And it has cycles for a reason. If it were winter all year round, nothing would grow. Now, I realize there are places where it literally is winter all year round. Y'all just roll with me on this, okay? Because there are cycles that exist, right? And there are cycles that exist where if it were winter all the time, nothing would grow. The summer all the time, there's all the things, right? And right now, as I'm saying this, I can hear some people being like, well, there are places where it's warm all the time. Yes, I understand that. And even within that, there are cycles of growth. There are cycles in, planting and that type of thing. There are still cycles that exist, right? So I completely appreciate and understand the literal nature, because I often am the one that's asking the same question. I'm like, but what about this? But there are cycles that exist, is my point. And in places that have cycles of seasons, it is a very demonstrable, tangible way to observe cycles, because sometimes it's more challenging to see something that's going on within us that isn't actually as visible as, ooh, the trees just turned, they fell off, the trees are coming back, the trees are blooming, the trees are green, the leaves died, that's a cycle you can see, but it's evidence for you that cycles exist. And men actually have cycles too, but women in particular have cycles that pretty much follow. I had somebody that came in and talked to my Unfuckwithable group. We were talking about the concept of rest, and then I had a guest speaker come in and talk, because it's all women in the group, and talk about women's cycles and embracing the power inherently in our feminine cycles. And the idea that each, week, and depending on how long your cycle is, but let's just, for the sake of argument, let's just say 30 days and it's a week, that each week sort of maps to a season, right? There's spring, there's summer, there's fall, there's winter. And I've noticed more this actual winter, the concept of feeling myself, of needing to winter with that cycle. And I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission to do that. We don't give ourselves permission to rest because, January 1st is a quote unquote new year, which, as I mentioned on my podcast earlier this season, all this shit is made up. We literally arbitrarily decided this is the start of a new year, when actually, by cycles and seasons, spring is typically the start of a new year. So you can celebrate the calendar new year, but if you've been in this season of, I don't know why, but I'm not really motivated, I feel the need to draw in, I have these things I want to do for myself or projects that I want to work on, but I really just I feel the need to draw in and hibernate. And if it's -10 outside, baby, maybe it's okay that you're in winter. We're not meant to be out doing all the damn things when it's that cold out. So you do you. I understand we all have things that we need to take care of, and also find moments of grace to give yourself the rest and the withdrawing that also comes with external seasons as well. Because as I said, we all have our own internal cycles. Women have cycles that we go through. Men have cycles too. And I think one of the best comparisons that I heard was that in men, cycles are more like the sun. Like, they'll be very focused, they'll be very intense, and then they'll rest. And don't quote me, because I actually don't have the information right now on what the actual biorhythms are of their cycles, but I do know that they exist. So educate yourself with a trusted source, and yay, you've learned something. And then with women, we follow the moon, right? It's the 30-day cycle. We go with the moon, which means women, ladies, there are times during your cycle where you're going to have more energy. You're going to have more creative energy. There's going to be a time in your cycle where you're going to want to withdraw and nobody talk to you. And there's going to be a time, go out and do some research on this. And if you're not aware of this, which I'll be quite honest with you, I wasn't. I'm going to be 46 this year. And I only recently started to truly understand my own feminine cycles, because I had fallen prey to the conditioning at a young age that it's a bad thing to have a cycle as a woman and it's a shameful thing. So you're supposed to power through it and don't rest and don't give yourself a break during those days. And then when I started getting into Ashtanga yoga, and they called it ladies' holiday, which basically was like, during these few days when you're on your cycle, don't practice. And that was very strange for my colonized, patriarchal, corporate culture, waspy upbringing mind, right? Wait, what do you mean? That's not allowed. That's unproductive. I'm supposed to push through no matter how I feel, right? Anyway, this idea of cycles, and this idea that it's okay for you to have cycles. And I always give these disclaimers, but truthfully, I don't believe that anybody that is attracted to me and my work ever falls into the category of somebody who could potentially be lazy, which I also don't believe lazy exists. But again, that's another conversation altogether. Those of you that are worried about being unproductive, I guarantee you're the last fucking people that ever need to be worried about being unproductive, because when you do have the energy to do the things, I can guarantee even if you and I haven't met, I can guarantee that when you do have the energy, you get more done in a day than most people do in a week or a month. Take that shit to the bank. So as you explore this idea of cycles, and as you explore this idea of what does it mean for you to rest and for you to start to tune more into your body, because we have also gotten, especially as women, we have gotten incredibly disconnected from our bodies. We've been told there's certain times we're supposed to eat, there's certain things we're supposed to eat, that you can't trust your body when your body says that it needs something. We have gotten disconnected and conditioned out of intuitively trusting our cycles and our bodies. And is it a journey back with that trust? Yes. Is it 100% possible? Yes. Do I believe it is 100% motherfucking necessary right now in the world we live in for every woman to come back in touch with her own intuition and her own knowing of her body? Yes, 100%. And just know there's nothing wrong with you if you feel disconnected. You were literally conditioned that way. And it just is. So let's just accept this is what it is, right? Like I said, I am on a journey to understand my own cycles at the age that I'm at, right? I am on the journey, just like many of you, of understanding what is my relationship to rest. I did an experiment in January because this is my year of great experimentation, which is another story altogether. But I did this experiment with rest because I came to realize that as one of my mentors was guiding me into this idea of rest, I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. I was like, but I thought I rested. I thought this was ease. And I'll never forget, it was a funny moment where she's been talking to me about ease and more ease and more ease. And I was planning a trip to go out and visit her and do some work together. And my schedule is quite busy on a regular basis. And I was like, okay, well, I can go out on this day and this time. And then as soon as I get there, I have this class I've got to hop on for the certification that I'm doing. And then I'll come and then we'll work together. And then I have to leave first thing on Sunday. And then I was like, and she's like, this doesn't feel easeful. I'm kind of stressed out just listening to you talk about it. And for me, I was like, I had a moment of reflection because I went, oh, I didn't even connect that this wasn't easeful and restful. This is just what I do. I organize my life and I make shit work. And when I stopped and thought about it, I realized it felt really rushed. It didn't feel spacious. It didn't feel easeful. It didn't feel good. And just like I help guide my clients to permission, she was giving me permission in a mirror to say, ma'am, this is the exact fucking opposite of what we're doing right now. We're trying to help you have more rest and more ease in your life, not how can you Jenga Tetris your schedule to force this period of rest in right here in between this and that. And you have to take this meeting from the car and that meeting from the car. Like, I used to be really, really proud. It's not that I'm not proud, but I think my identity used to be associated with how much I could get done, and not necessarily in a healthy, helpful way, right? And there's, just like anything, there are higher frequencies and lower frequencies to it. There's a very high frequency. As a manifesting generator, if I'm lit up in human design, if I'm lit up by something, I can, oh my gosh, I have all the energy. And I'm always, it's guaranteed, I'm doing 16 projects at once. It's just how I am. And as long as those things are lighting me up, that's amazing because I can get so much shit done when I'm lit up. But that's very different than the way I used to be with like my corporate job and all these other things where I was like, it's a badge of honor to see how much I can burn myself out and use this energy and do this and Tetris this and make all these things happen. But it was coming from a very frenetic, colonized sort of energy. It wasn't coming from a regenerative energy because I really wanted to. And there's a difference there, right? But wow, I got off track from my rest experience. It's all right. It's all related. So I did this experiment in January with rest because I was just feeling really run down is not the right word. It was just, the calendar had just turned over. It's a new year. I have these intentions that for, 2025 and see aforementioned 16 projects at once. I was like, okay, the energy is going to be here. It's 2025. I'm going to do the things. And I just sat there and I was like, there is literally not an ounce of energy in me that is ready to do the things. I wasn't. And it was cold as fuck outside. We had like 2 feet of snow. And I was like, I don't want to do the things right now. I want to snuggle up and I want to rest. And there was a lot in me that was like, oh, I don't think you can do that. But I've done just enough work on it that I was like, all right, we'll give this a shot. And so I allowed myself to rest. And for me, what this rest looked like in this moment was I was playing Jewel, the game Microsoft Jewel, on my iPad. And I had Star Trek Next Generation on in the background because I haven't watched that since I was a kid. And I just had this like intuitive nudge. Purchase the whole series of Star Trek The Next Generation and there's something here for you and watch this. And so I went, all right. Because again, a topic for another time, but those intuitive nudges, there's something there for you, even if you can't put your finger on it at the time. And there was definitely something there for me. But so I sat there and I did it for like a weekend. And I kind of felt myself go, oh, you need to get up. You need to do the things. Like, I mean, I kept the things going that needed to be going, by which the house would fall apart if I didn't. But not more than that. I really didn't. And then I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens if I continue this concept of rest, if I choose not to push myself excessively. Let me just see, what is this experiment with rest? And what I noticed was I cycled through that voice that started shouting at me. Your business is going to fail if you don't get up and do this. This is going to happen if you don't get up and do this. You're never going to finish your book if you don't get up and do this. Blah, 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 blah. And I just saw it and I said, all right, baby. I said, I see you there. I see all these voices. I see all these stories that you're telling yourself. I see them and I love you. And guess what? We're not going to do that right now. This is my experiment. We're just going to see what happens. We're going to see what happens when I really allow myself to take rest. And what happened was after a period of a couple days, like all of a sudden, I had energy to do things again. Like I wanted to get up and do the things. And then in about a day, I got done what would normally take me 2 weeks. And I had all these other things happen externally, which all these things started to come to me. Clients came, that worked with me before came back and wanted to work together again. I had, an opportunity come to me out of the blue. And it was as though I was seeing the evidence that when I actually do rest and allow that spaciousness, the world doesn't fall apart. Actually, when you do it intentionally, you can create a lot of amazing things in your life, right? And there's a lot more to that I can expand upon later if it's something that's of interest to you all. But it was a really interesting experiment for me as someone who historically is just constantly doing the things and has had a hard time that I actually didn't realize in actually taking rest without any kind of shame and guilt and without any of those voices in my head. And so what this experiment showed me was, when I rest, the world doesn't actually fall apart. The business doesn't actually burn down. Nothing bad actually happened. The only thing that happened was I had some mild discomfort when the voice in my head was shouting at me. And then once that passed and I crossed over to the other side, I was like, oh, this is actually amazing. And I wondered at one point, I was like, am I just going to sit here forever and merge with the couch? And then I thought, there is 0% chance that will happen to you, Rayford. There's just no fucking way. You're not that. That's just not who you are. It's not in your DNA. And sure as shit, of course not. I gave myself permission. I allowed myself to truly take radical rest. And within a matter of days, I had all this energy back. And I went, like I said, I went and did actually it was probably in half a day, shit that would have taken me 2 weeks if I was pushing myself uphill, running out of steam, trying to force myself to do these things without allowing myself to genuinely take and enjoy that rest period. I also want to acknowledge that I have the privilege and ability to do that. And that's not lost on me because first of all, I don't have children. And so I don't have anybody that's pulling at me. So I actually have the privilege of being able to try that experiment. So I'm giving voice to that because I think it's important to note, because there is one thing that I find a little tone deaf sometimes, and I'm not saying that I'm not sometimes probably unconsciously tone deaf, is, a single meaning no children, right? Person telling other women they just need to find time to rest, but not doing it with any kind of considerate, compassionate, and understanding way, right? I understand even without having young children, I have friends that have them. I do understand there's challenges associated with that, right? I equally believe that it's important to find even small moments within that because you deserve it, right? You do. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I realize there may be some mamas out there listening to me going, lady, if I could get 6 days to rest, I would. I understand. I hear you. I love you. And it's just a illustration and an illumination of our relationship to rest in whatever season you're in, because we do go through some intense seasons in life. And just like we have seasons in our day and our cycles, there are seasons to our life. You may be in a very intense season right now. Raising young children is a very intense season, right? Raising kids in general is an intense season. And so your rest within that season may look different at different times. The rest is still important in whatever way you can find it, with disconnecting as much of that guilt as possible, right? So I want to just acknowledge that. The other thing that I want to say is that what I have seen, which has been really cool, is so both my parents, and I know they're listening to this, and I love y'all so much for this, they are two of the most talented people I have ever met, each in their own unique ways. And when you put them together, I am literally convinced there's nothing that my parents cannot do together. But we'll periodically talk to them like, oh, we put down new flooring in the house, or we put down new flooring in the laundry room. We redid the stairs. My parents are in their 80s, and I love them for this. It is so inspiring and so amazing. But as two people that my entire life, they have always been doers. My mom stayed home. She took care of the house, but I never saw her sit down ever, 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 ever. You people out there talking about stay-at-home moms don't know anything about what the fuck they actually do. So I love you, but shut up. Always doing something. Always, always, always doing. My dad's a really hard worker. My mom's a really hard worker. It's just in our DNA. And what I have seen them do now is that they will do the things, or they will take a trip, they will work on a project, and then they will give themselves time to rest. And I love this for them. They're like, oh, we did all these things. We're going to take these 3 days. We're just going to sit on the couch. We're going to watch movies. We're going to read. We're just going to chill out. And I'm like, I love this, because this is a really great example of what this looks like. You can do the things and then give yourself a break. Like, you need the break. You deserve the break. And I understand that, I mean, this is true for all of us, but with age and wisdom and all the things, like, your body literally may not have the energy to keep going. So you're forced to listen to it to calm down and to quiet down and to take some rest. But I love that modeling, right? Because there's no reason why both of these things can't exist, and why you cannot just unapologetically take rest. Do the things, take the rest. In the same way that if you're working, I like to tie things to fitness analogies. You're working out, your muscles will need a rest period to rejuvenate. Otherwise, they'll be depleted and they don't ever have time to rest and recuperate. So it's actually super healthy to take rest. If you're running a marathon, right, you always have a taper where you have a rest week. It's been so long since I ran, I forgot what the hell that is called, but there's a term for it. And you take a rest period basically before you go out and run the marathon. I'm assuming people still do this. It's been 20-something years since I ran my marathon. But anyway, you get my point. Rest is important for things to rejuvenate. Rest is important to replenish, to renew, and then to come back even stronger. And so just like there are seasons and there are cycles, you yourself have seasons and cycles on a daily, weekly, hourly, sometimes basis. And this is your permission slip to start to explore what your relationship is with rest, and where you can start to find the places that you're beating yourself with a bat that somebody gave you through your conditioning, and where you can start to shift that. where you can notice, oh, that voice in my head is screaming at me that I'm being unproductive and idle hands and whatever story I have. Interesting that that's there. I'm going to put a pin in that. I'm going to choose not to pay attention to this right now because what I know to be true is cycles, whatever it is that you know to be true that you've explored on your own, right? With your own research that you've pulled in either from things I've said or from things you've picked up from other people or books you've read, wherever. Just ask yourself, what do I actually know to be true? And what is the new belief that I choose to have about rest? The more I rest, the more I get done, right? The more I rest, the more productive I actually am. These are new paradigms and these are new beliefs that it's really time in our society that we start conditioning in. Unconditioning the old, deconditioning the old, and starting to incorporate these new, truly more empowering beliefs, because in the long run, this creates a regenerative society and it creates regeneration within yourself and within your own life. And that is how we break this cycle of being burned out, stressed out, diseased, and exhausted on a regular basis. Is one of the key ways, right? So this podcast has been your invitation into awareness about your relationship with rest. And so I'm always curious to hear as you're listening. Drop me a line on Instagram, go to the website, shoot me an email. I'm always curious to hear, what are your reflections? What have you noticed? What have you uncovered in your exploration of radical rest? So with that, I'm going to invite you this week to find a place to rest without guilt. Do something that doesn't feel productive and let it be okay that it's not. And start to tune in more to your own personal cycles. And as always, I want to invite you to sparkle on. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.